out past the red stone bluffs of northern Arizona, where the wind runs low like a tired old animal. Folks speak of a woman carved out of the mesa itself. They say she stands taller than most men on horseback, her shadow stretching long across the dust like a warning from the earth. And they call her Sahana of Red Mesa, the giant woman who guards the Forbidden Pass. Most men who've crossed her path tell the same story. You don't challenge her, you don't stare her down, you don't pretend you're strong enough. But this story ain't about most men. It's about the one who didn't turn back. His name was Elias Hart, a rancher turned horse handler, a man with dust on his boots and a memory he carried like a broken bottle in his chest. He wasn't famous, he wasn't feared, but he had a way of standing still, like the ground beneath him mattered more than the storm around him. And on that early morning, with the sun rising in a thin copper line, he rode toward the Forbidden Pass with a single small saddlebag, holding medicine he prayed wasn't too late. The mining camp west of Red Mesa had been struck by a fever that burned quick and cruel. An illness Elias knew too well. He had watched his younger brother die of it years ago, helpless as a child trying to stop a river with bare hands. When word reached him that the fever had returned, twisting its way through the canyons toward families who had no one to ride for them, he didn't hesitate. He saddled his mare, whispered a promise to the wind, and set out across Apache land, not out of arrogance, but because time itself was the enemy. The first sign he had crossed into sacred territory was the silence. No birds, no rustling brush, just wind. And then, a shadow. A figure stepping onto the trail. Sahana stood before him like a monument left behind by giants. Her shoulders broad, her hair braided with strips of turquoise cloth, her gaze sharp as obsidian. She didn't reach for a weapon. She didn't have to. Her presence alone was enough to turn most men around. Elias guided his horse to a stop. The mare snorted, uneasy. Sahana spoke first, her voice low and steady, like distant thunder. No man crosses Red Mesa without my word. Turn back. Elias swallowed the dust drying on his tongue. I'm carrying medicine. There are children dying on the west side. I ain't here to steal land or trouble your people. Her eyes narrowed. Men say anything when fear is on their heels. Then look at me, Elias said quietly. Do I look like a man running from fear? The wind moved between them, drifting in long red ribbons over the stone. Sahana studied him, not the way a warrior sizes an enemy, but the way someone tries to understand a stubborn truth standing in front of them. You're not strong enough to pass, she said. Elias didn't bristle, didn't puff his chest, didn't meet fire with fire. He simply answered. Strength ain't always measured the way most folks think. That was the moment, silent, unmarked, but real, when something shifted. Like a page turning in a book neither of them had agreed to read. But before Sahana could decide what to make of this man who would not bend, the ground beneath them shuddered. A crack tore through the mesa wall. Dust exploded upward. A boulder broke loose. And somewhere behind Sahana, a young voice cried out. She spun and ran, faster than Elias thought possible, toward a narrow path carved along the cliffside. Elias dismounted and followed on foot, boots pounding against the trembling ground. When they rounded the bend, they found a boy pinned beneath a fallen slab of rock. His breaths were sharp, panicked, his right leg twisted wrong. Sahana dropped to her knees, her large hands trembling despite all her strength. Little Hawk, she whispered, her voice cracking in a way Elias hadn't thought it could. Stay with me. Without waiting for permission, Elias knelt beside her. You lift, he said softly. I'll pull him free. Sahana hesitated, but just for a heartbeat. Then she braced her legs, pressed her palms against the stone, and pushed. Her muscles strained, jaw clenched, the ground groaning under the effort. Elias slipped his arms beneath the boy and pulled. With a final gasp from both of them, the rock shifted enough for the child to slide out. Sahana scooped the boy into her arms, holding him close, grief and fear raw on her face. His legs broken, Elias murmured, if we don't splint it and keep him from losing too much blood, he won't make the trip home. Sahana looked up sharply. You know healing? Enough to save him, Elias said, but I'll need your help. For the first time since they met, Sahana didn't stand above him. She knelt beside him, two people in the dust, united not by trust yet, but by necessity. They worked in silence, the kind born of urgency. Elias straightened the limb while Sahana held the boy steady, whispering comfort in the Apache tongue. Her voice, deep as it was, carried a tenderness that surprised Elias more than her size or her strength. When they finished, Elias wrapped his coat around the boy. We need to get him to shelter. He won't make it through the cold if we stay out here. Sahana hesitated again, not out of doubt, but out of something far more painful. She was a warrior trained to break threats, not mend broken children. Come with me, she said at last. There is a healer's hut beyond the ridge. But know this, if you step foot there, you place yourself in the hands of my people. Elias met her gaze. I'm already in your hands, Sahana. She didn't answer, but something flickered in her eyes, something old, something tired, something yearning. As they set off toward the hidden ridge, Sahana carrying the boy and Elias walking beside her mare. The wind picked up again, sliding over the mesa like it was whispering a truth older than both of them. No one stays strong alone forever. And for the first time in years, Sahana felt the weight of that truth pressing against her ribs. They reached the healer's hut by mid-afternoon, a small timber cabin tucked beneath a ridge of red stone that sloped like a broken shoulder. The door hung on old leather hinges, and bundles of sage and desert lavender swayed from the rafters, brushing the air with a scent that felt older than memory. Sahana carried the boy, Little Hawk, inside, her arms steady but her breath shaking. Elias noticed how she stepped through the doorway sideways, too tall for its frame, as if the world itself had always been built a size too small for her. Inside, the cabin was dim. Sunlight slipped through narrow slats in thin golden lines. A clay bowl sat cracked on the table. A pile of blankets lay in the corner. It looked abandoned, but not forgotten. Sahana gently laid Little Hawk onto a mat of woven yucca leaves. He will need water, she said, and heat. The nights turn cruel this time of year. Elias nodded. I'll start a fire. As he stacked mesquite branches in the stone hearth, Sahana knelt beside the boy and checked the splint they'd made. Her large hands were careful, deliberate. Elias glanced over his shoulder and saw an expression he hadn't expected on her face, fear wrapped in tenderness. When the fire caught, Sahana spoke without looking up. This hut belonged to my grandmother. She healed many here, some from my people, some from yours. Elias paused, holding a burning twig. Then she and I would have had a thing in common. Sahana finally looked at him. You heal because you choose to? He shook his head. I heal because I couldn't save my brother. I don't intend to fail another child. Silence settled between them, not cold, but heavy like a blanket laid across both hearts. Outside, the canyon wind keened against the wood, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the weight each of them carried. Hours passed in slow, deliberate rhythms, checking the boy's breathing, cooling his fevered skin, whispering to the fire so it wouldn't die. At some point, Little Hawk drifted into uneasy sleep. Sahana stepped outside, and Elias followed. The night had slid over the mesa in deep indigo hues. Stars scattered like cold sparks across a wide, unbroken sky. Sahana stood near the edge of the ridge, her silhouette so tall it looked like it belonged to the sky more than the earth. You're quiet, Elias said. I have spent my life being the wall my people lean on. She answered softly, but walls do not rest. They do not grieve, and they are never allowed to break. Elias moved closer, boots crunching over gravel. Even stone cracks. Sahana, nothing holds forever, not alone. She turned her head, studying him in the dim firelight that spilled from the cabin window. You speak as if you know the weight I carry. I know what it's like to be expected to stand strong when you're tired enough to fall apart. He said, strength is lonely. Folks mistake it for certainty. But mostly, it's just the part you let the world see. Sahana's gaze drifted toward the canyon floor. In my people's stories, there is a tale of a woman who grew so tall from carrying sorrow that she could no longer hear the voices of those she protected. Her heart rose high into the clouds, and she forgot the shape of her own name. "That sounds like a sad story," Elias said. "It is," Sahana murmured, because she never learned that she did not have to carry the weight alone. A quiet settled between them, different now, warmer, threaded with something fragile and unspoken. Then Sahana's shoulders tensed, her head snapping toward the south. Drums. Low, distant, rhythmic. Elias recognized the sound even before she spoke. "Your people?" he asked. She nodded. "They will look for the boy. And when they find you here, they will assume the worst." "I helped him," Elias said. "You did too." "That will not matter." Elias exhaled slowly. "Then tell me what to do." For the first time, Sahana seemed uncertain. "You should flee," she said. "If they believe you harmed Little Hawk, they will kill you before you can speak." "And leave you to face them alone?" Elias asked quietly. "No." Her eyes widened slightly, not in anger, but in something closer to disbelief. "You would stand beside me?" she asked. "I already am." The drumbeats grew louder, echoing against the mesa walls in long ominous waves. Sahana stepped forward, her towering frame blocking the moonlight. "I must speak for you," she said, "but understand this. My people trust my strength, not my mercy. If I defend you, I become the crack in the wall, and walls that crack rarely stand long." Elias nodded. "Then maybe it's time you stopped being a wall." The words hit her harder than a blow. Not because they challenged her duty, but because they named the ache she had buried for years. Before Sahana could answer, a group of Apache riders appeared, emerging from the shadows like spirits called from the stone. Their horses snorted, their torches flickering. The leader dismounted, eyes sharp as arrowheads. "Sahana," he said, "we tracked the boy, we saw the rockslide, and we found tracks of a white man." Elias stepped forward, palms open. "I mean no harm." The men reached for their weapons. Sahana raised her arm, voice cutting clean through the tension. "Stop, he saved Little Hawk. Without him, the child would be dead." The warriors froze, eyes shifted between her and Elias. The leader spoke again. "Sahana, your duty is to guard our land, not bring outsiders into the sacred ridge." Her jaw tightened. "I brought him nowhere, circumstance did, and he has done nothing but protect life." The man looked at her for a long, waited moment. "You were always our strongest warrior," he said, "but strength without obedience becomes danger." A muscle in Sahana's cheek twitched, but she did not bow her head. Elias stepped between them before she could speak. "If you need someone to blame," he said softly, "blame me, not her." The warriors murmured, surprised by the boldness. Sahana's eyes flashed. "Elias." But the leader held up a hand. "Enough," he said, "the elders will decide. At dawn, we take the boy and the stranger to the council." Then he fixed Sahana with a long, searching stare. "And you must remember who you are." The riders backed away, disappearing into the dark to make camp nearby. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Sahana's shoulders sagged, not from defeat, but from the cold weight of choice. "You shouldn't have spoken for me," she whispered. "And you shouldn't have carried everything alone," he replied. For the first time, she didn't argue. Inside the hut, Little Hawk stirred, the fire crackled, and the night wrapped around them with the heavy understanding that dawn would test them both. But for now, just for a moment, they stood side by side, not wall and traveler, not Apache and outsider, but two tired souls leaning into the same wind. Dawn slipped slowly across Red Mesa, not as a burst of gold but as a pale wash of light. Timid and uncertain, like the day itself wasn't sure it wanted to begin. The council fire smoldered in a low ring of stones, and the scent of sage drifted through the morning air. Sahana stood beside Elias, towering and unmoving, though Elias could sense the tension in her shoulders, the tension of someone who had spent her whole life preparing to carry burdens but never to share them. Little Hawk lay bundled nearby, breathing steadier now. Two warriors guarded him, their eyes shifting between the sleeping boy and the outsider who had helped him live. Elias rubbed the dust from his palms and tried to steady his own breath. He had never stood in front of an Apache council before. But fear wasn't what twisted in his chest. It was the knowledge that any wrong word could cost Sahana far more than it cost him. When the elders arrived, they did so in silence, moving like shadows along the ridge. The oldest among them, Grandfather Atsa, leaned on a carved cane. His hair white as frost, his eyes sharp and unnervingly calm. He looked first at Sahana. "You brought an outsider into the healer's hut," he said. "A place meant for our wounded and our spirits. Explain yourself." Sahana bowed her head, not in submission, but in respect. There was no choice. Little Hawk would have died. "This man," she gestured to Elias, "helped me free him. He set the bone. He kept him alive through the night." Atsa shifted his gaze to Elias. "You crossed sacred land, a place your people have misused for generations. Why?" Elias met his eyes without bravado. "The fever in the mining camp moves fast. Children were dying. I took the shortest path, even though I knew the risk. Saving them mattered more than my own safety." Murmurs rippled through the warriors. One of them stepped forward, scowling. "And what of the sickness? It is brought by your people, your camps, your mining. Why should we let you pass to spread more suffering?" Elias shook his head. "Medicine stops sickness, not spreads it, and I'd ride the long way if I had the time, but I don't. Those kids don't. If I fail them," his voice faltered, "I've failed enough family for one lifetime." The elder studied him for a long moment. Then he turned back to Sahana. "You are our strongest warrior," Atsa said. "We depend on you to guard these borders. Yet you stand beside this man as if he is your equal." Sahana straightened, the early light catching the turquoise strips in her braid. "He is not my equal in strength," she said, "but strength is not the measure for this moment." "And what is?" Atsa asked. Sahana's eyes flicked to Elias, then back to the elder. "Intention, heart, the courage to stand in danger not for himself, but for others." Another murmur ran through the crowd, confusion, discomfort, maybe even something like awe. Atsa's gaze sharpened. "You speak with conviction, Sahana, but there is fear in your voice. What is it you fear?" Sahana drew a slow breath, and her words came like stones pulled from a deep river. "I fear becoming a wall so tall that I no longer hear the ones I protect. I fear that in trying to be strong alone, I have forgotten how to trust." The mesa fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Elias felt something shift, like watching a mountain soften at the edges. Atsa turned, pacing a few steps along the ridge. Then he spoke. "Sahana, strength is not the burden you carry. It is the wisdom to know when to lay it down. If you believe this man's purpose is pure, then you may choose your path. But understand, if he fails to keep his promise, it is you who will bear the weight of that failure." Sahana nodded once, solemn. "I accept that responsibility." The elder looked to Elias. "And you? Will you swear to return once your task is done? To not wander our land without cause?" "I swear it," Elias said, "on the memory of the brother I couldn't save." Atsa closed his eyes, as though consulting something deeper than his own thoughts. When he opened them, the decision had settled. "You may pass," he said, "but Sahana must go with you, to ensure our people are not blamed for the sickness, and to ensure you return." Gasps rose from the warriors. Elias turned to Sahana, surprised. She didn't look shocked. She looked relieved, as though the choice had been made the moment she pulled Little Hawk from the dust. Atsa lifted his cane. "Let the boy rest a day. When the sun next rises, you will travel to the mining camp together." The council dispersed, leaving only the wind and the faint crackle of dying embers. Elias approached Sahana slowly. "You okay with this?" "I am," she said, though her voice carried a tremor beneath the calm. "For years, I've stood guard, waiting for a threat. Perhaps it is time I walk a different path." Elias rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to say. "Didn't expect you to go with me." Her eyes softened. "Didn't expect anyone to stand beside me. Yet here we are." They loaded supplies into saddlebags, prepared a sling for Little Hawk's transport once he recovered. and spent the remainder of the day repairing the hut so it would remain ready for the next wounded soul. As dusk burned the sky into copper and violet, Sahana and Elias sat beside the fire outside. The silence between them felt different now, less like a gulf, more like a bridge. Elias poked at the fire with a stick. "You know," he said quietly, "if someone told me last week I'd be riding with a warrior giant across sacred Apache land, I'd have called him crazy." Sahana huffed a small breath, almost a laugh. "And if someone told me I'd allow a stranger to walk beside me, I would have said the same." Their eyes met. Not with surprise, not with fear, but with the recognition of two lonely lives no longer entirely alone. Then, from inside the hut, Little Hawk called weakly for water. Sahana rose immediately, ducking under the low doorway. Elias followed, handing her a fresh cup. The boy blinked up at them. "You saved me," he whispered. Sahana shook her head gently. "We saved you." The boy's gaze shifted to Elias. "My grandmother used to say, sometimes the spirits send the right person at the right time, even if he comes from far away." Elias swallowed hard. "Your grandmother sounds wise." "She was," Little Hawk murmured. "She said strength is meant to be shared." Sahana's breath caught. For a moment, the room felt full, not of smoke or firelight, but of something older and aching and true. When the boy fell asleep again, Elias stepped outside so Sahana could have a moment alone. The stars had returned, scattered like silver arrows across the sky. Elias looked up at them, feeling a weight he hadn't realized he carried start to loosen in his chest. Behind him, Sahana stepped out of the cabin, her presence filling the night like the quiet hum of the earth. "Tomorrow," she said, "we ride together." Elias nodded. "I'm ready." Sahana tilted her head slightly, watching him. For the first time in a long while, she said softly, "I think I am too." The fire crackled at their feet. The mesa breathed around them. And somewhere in the deep valley below, the wind whispered the beginning of something neither of them had the courage to name. Not yet. But soon. The morning came harsh and bright, a white sun lifting over the ridge as if impatient with the slow rhythm of human decisions. Elias tightened the saddle straps on his mare while Sahana checked the bindings securing the medical pouch he carried. They worked side by side without speaking, but the silence felt steady, like two rivers running in the same direction. Little Hawk stood outside the healer's hut, leaning on a carved walking stick. His leg was still tender, but his smile was determined. "You will come back, won't you?" the boy asked. Sahana knelt so her eyes were level with his. "I return when the wind calls me home," she said, "and I will see you healed strong enough to outrun your cousins again." Little Hawk nodded proudly. "And you, Elias, will you come back too?" Elias hesitated, glancing at Sahana before answering. "If she lets me," he said. The boy grinned, satisfied. Then he stepped back as Sahana mounted her coal-black horse, a towering mare with a streak of white through her mane. Elias mounted his chestnut. Together, they began the long ride toward the mining camp that lay beyond the western slope. The trail wound through narrow canyons where the stone walls rose like ancient guardians, their shadows long and cold even in midday. Sahana rode ahead, scanning the ridges, her posture alert but not tense. "You're watching for more than danger," Elias said after a while. "I am watching for what I have missed," she replied. "When you spend years guarding borders, you start seeing enemies everywhere. It becomes a habit, a heavy one." Elias nodded slowly. "I know a little about carrying habits that don't fit anymore." She glanced at him. "Such as?" He took a breath. "Running, keeping distance, pretending solitude is a choice instead of a wound." Sahana's expression softened. "And now?" "Now I'm riding beside someone who knows what those wounds feel like," Elias said quietly. The canyon widened ahead, opening into a prairie of tall golden grass. A warm wind rustled through it, carrying the faint scent of juniper and dust. Sahana slowed her horse, letting their mounts walk side by side. "For years," she said, "I believed strength meant silence. That if I kept my fears hidden, they would disappear." She exhaled, the sound heavy, but they did not. They only grew louder. Elias looked at her carefully. "What are you afraid of, Sahana?" She didn't answer at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I fear that if I allow myself to be more than the guardian of my people, I will fail them, and if I allow myself to be seen, truly seen, I may fail myself." Elias reached over, gently touching her forearm, a gesture small compared to the vastness of the land around them, but big enough to feel like a promise. "You don't have to choose between strength and being human," he said. "You're allowed to be both." Her breath hitched, not from sadness but from the shock of hearing words she had never given herself permission to speak. Before she could respond, Elias pointed ahead. Smoke. A thin column rose in the distance, wavering in the shimmering heat above the prairie. Sahana's posture changed instantly. The camp. They pushed their horses into a gallop, dust curling behind them like chasing storm clouds. As they crested a small ridge, the mining camp came into view, rows of crooked wooden shacks. A few tents, a central fire pit. People moved like ghosts between the structures, slow and weary. Elias slowed, taking in the sight with a tightening throat. "This is worse than I feared." Sahana scanned the camp, her jaw firming with resolve. "Then we do not waste time." The moment the camp noticed their arrival, a few men staggered forward. Their faces were gaunt, sweat slicked, and pale. One of them raised a trembling hand. "Are you the medicine rider?" he croaked. Elias slid off his horse and knelt beside him. "I've got what you need, but we'll have to move fast." As Elias unpacked the medical pouch, mixing herbs and measured powders, Sahana stood guard, but not as a warrior prepared to strike, rather as a presence reassuring enough to draw frightened families closer instead of driving them away. Children gathered around her, wide-eyed. She knelt to speak gently to a feverish girl whose cheeks burned with heat. "You are strong," Sahana murmured, "but you do not have to pretend today." The girl leaned into her, seeking comfort in arms built for battle yet steady as a mother's. Elias watched from across the camp, moved by the way Sahana shifted so naturally from warrior to healer. Every time she touched someone, every time she reassured a parent or cooled a child's forehead, her strength reshaped itself, no longer a wall, but a refuge. Hours passed in relentless effort. Elias treated the worst cases with mixtures he'd learned from a Mexican herbalist years ago. Sahana tended the fires, carried water, and moved through the camp with a calm that softened even the hardest faces. At one point, a sick miner stared at her towering frame and muttered, "I never thought I'd see an Apache save a white man's camp." Sahana met his gaze without anger. "Disease does not choose sides," she said, "neither should healing." By dusk, the camp began to settle, exhausted but hopeful. Elias sat heavily on a crate, wiping sweat and dust from his forehead. His hands ached from the work, but his heart felt lighter. Sahana approached with 2 canteens. She handed him one. "You saved them," she said. He shook his head. "We saved them." She smiled faintly, the firelight warming the hard edges of her face. "I have stood in many battles," she said, "but today felt different." Elias drank deeply, then looked at her with a seriousness that pulled the air tight around them. "You know," he said, "most folks think strength is about what you can fight. But watching you out there, I think it's about what you can carry, and what you can choose to put down." Sahana sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I carried many things alone for too long," she whispered, "but you do not make me feel smaller or weaker. You make me feel." She trailed off, searching for words. Elias finished for her. "Seen?" She nodded, emotion tightening her throat. The moment held, long and fragile, until a cough from a nearby tent broke the stillness. Elias rose. "I should check on the boy with the bad fever," he said, "then we'll rest." Sahana stood too. "I will come with you." They moved together through the dimming camp, shoulder to shoulder, 2 silhouettes cut against a sky bruised purple and amber. The work wasn't finished, but the fear that once separated their worlds had thinned into something gentler, something like trust. As they entered the tent, Elias glanced at her and murmured, "Whatever comes after this, we face it together, right?" Sahana looked at him with a tenderness that felt almost dangerous in its honesty. "Yes," she said, "together." Outside, night settled like a blanket over Red Mesa, and the wind carried a quiet truth across the darkened land. Strength shared becomes something new, something whole, something unbreakable.
If tonight's journey brought you peace or helped ease a weight you've been carrying, go on and tap that like button, partner.